Thank you guys all for being here for our first open forum of 2019, which is so exciting and kicking off the rest of this semester of our assessment work for the academic year. So Christopher and I are going to be talking a little bit, kind of the conversation that was started at the full-time faculty workshop about assessing general education outcomes, and we're going to really bring it down to kind of this next semester, this next year, they'll contextualize it in the work that we're doing in our assessment, kind of building these assessment processes and structures, and then getting some feedback from all of you. So for those of you who are here in person, giving us feedback on that, and then for those faculty who are watching this online, really encouraged to email, call me, chat with either Christopher and I in person, give us some of your feedback and some of your feeling on these approaches and these strategies. So as a quick recap, I'm going to turn it over to Christopher, and he's going to kind of introduce us.
Excellent. And I really like what Lauren said about it's kind of a conversation about this topic, right? I sometimes feel like we stand up here in these open fora and it almost feels like a lecture. And that's really not 100% what's going on here. More just kind of a guided or structured conversation around this topic. What we're going to be talking about today is the topic of general education outcomes, and what does that look like in terms of informing our assessments going forward, right? So ultimately, we as an institution sort of not only acknowledge, but also publish the fact that we anticipate students completing a program for our campus will have acquired a certain core set of general education outcomes outside of their specific topic, right? So if you are like in a track and you're going to be studying computer science or accounting, or in addition to that, then the more rounded overall general education outcomes. So it's what are students learning, right? So what by the end of the program, in addition to specific knowledge like my area, culinary, what other things would we hope that you have a good exposure to or starting to develop some skill in? Those used to be 9, and we have fixed what was a cumbersome situation, probably not very realistic or even effectual or producing good results, and have trimmed those down to 5, right? And they should all look very reasonable to you, right? We've talked about these before, and I'm going to read them to you: critical thinking, communication, right? Information literacy, quantitative literacy, right? One that I think my students struggle with enormously, right? They went into my career era probably because they were hoping they wouldn't have to do a lot of computation. Wrong. And then global learning, right? How to become a citizen of the world, and how do you look at global issues in general, right? Those are things we would all, as educators, hope that we would help develop in our students. So those will be the ones that we'll be talking about as we move forward. Our goal for this semester is then to identify where those are being taught in our programs. In terms of talking about assessing general education outcomes, it's important to realize that they aren't like discrete things, right? It's not an outcome that's very, very highly specific. Like for instance, in my area, it would be being able to correctly weigh out ingredients, right? It would be a very specific outcome. General education outcomes are broader, right? They're not discrete. They appear in various formats, in various classes. They are interdisciplinary. They are global, right? And they are, as the second bullet point says, addressed in more than one instance, and should be more than likely addressed over and over and over again. And probably the thing that is most important is that it's guided and directed by the faculty, right? So that whole facilitating process of your faculty role is making certain that we're not just saying this is our general education outcome, but in class actually identifying that this topic, this assignment, this sort of group conversation is actually addressing this particular idea, linking those together so that students can begin to understand what it is that they're learning. Because I think there's a disconnect between now, okay, we have quantitative literacy, and then we have an assignment. We're trying to figure out how we get that to the assignment. And that is the role of the faculty, right? Students aren't going to make that leap and be like, oh, this must be that part where I learned about global, awareness. Okay. And then here's why really this should matter to us, right? And that's quality assurance part, right? So as practitioners of education, right? How do we know that we're actually delivering on this promise, right? How do we know? Like, I mean, sure, I can make a case for, oh yeah, in my class we do communication, right? All the students have to, but is it actually directed? Is it actually, thought out and done in a focused way? So it's a way for us as we develop our assessments and are starting to look at our structure is, do we have a system in place that identifies, are we assuring that these things are being done? Are they learning what we say we're learning, right? Okay. And this is probably the end goal for this whole process, right? Is, are we going to, at the end of all of this, come out with something that is measurable, identifiable, that is showing us useful, probably the most important word up on this board, right? Otherwise, we're going through this process. This should be the data that is generated by assessment. The result that is demonstrated should be useful. And it might very well not be correct. It might very well identify we're doing a really lousy job at certain aspects of our general education. And that would be useful to know that we're not doing that so that we can make adjustments and plans.
Mm-hmm. So I'd love to just kind of take this question and maybe open that up for a second and then think of having it be a little bit more of a conversation and less of a lecture on our side. So what does that, as you kind of reflect on that question, what does that look like for you as a faculty member, taking the 5 general education outcomes? Like, what kind of questions would you want answered as we do assessment? What does it look like to have data that would be meaningful and valuable to you as you think about students learning in your classroom, in your program, and then upon leaving Triton College?
Like nursing, when we have our program outcomes required by our funding body, we have to have such generalized program outcomes as 80% of our students pass NCLEX. 80% of our students are going to find a job, things like that. Those are our program outcomes.
Yeah.
And then our end of program, like student learning outcomes, are different. Those are things like our students will be able to perform assessment on all people across the lifespan. All students will be able to create a plan of care for patients across the lifespan. And then every one of our courses have to have course objectives that show how we meet those end of program objectives. In other words, what does this course do to enable that student to be able to do that physical on that patient? So every one of our courses have to have a level. Initially, I just review it. Second semester, maybe I can initialize it. You know what I mean? By the very end, I should be able to analyze and put all that together. So it's like a story. What do I do at every course to enable me to be at that end of the program?
So what would be helpful for you in terms of maybe the courses that your students go through that aren't in your area? So if we talk about, for example, your degree programs that have the general education kind of core, right? When we're thinking about, there you go. We think about writing, right? Communication, the encountering diverse perspectives, right? Or global learning, those kinds of things that are being covered in our general education core. But maybe you're teaching some of those aspects, right, in your courses, so your discipline courses, but that are also being taught by other faculty members right here. They're not just taking
like our science courses.
Yeah. So the courses are kind of gen ed core, right? that we're saying this is the core of our curriculum that is going to teach students these things. Not that they're not going to encounter other courses, but we have this kind of gen ed core for a reason. What would be useful data to know about your students, for example, or questions that you would want to know? Like, for example, if they are not communicating orally to maybe the standard that you would like to see, or collectively we say, our students, we could really look at our writing curriculum, right, and improve.
They have to be able to write.
Yeah.
They have to be able to electronic medical record and to document.
Right.
They have to be able to have basic anatomy and physiology knowledge. So this way, when it's not my nurse practice act to diagnose anyone unless I'm a nurse practitioner, but I should have the knowledge in anatomy and physiology to be able to say, wow, look at that.
Right.
And be able to document in a clear way exactly what they see. Have enough information from an information technologies point that they can effectively use an electronic medical record.
Right, and I think that's a great point. That's something for across our curriculum, right? Faculty are interested in how well students can communicate, right? Both orally and written, right? So kind of data across the institution. How well are our students doing in that, right? And kind of getting a pulse of how well our curriculum is preparing students, whether they're going directly into the workforce or whether they are transferring, how well are we preparing them to do that, right? And that would be interest of faculty across the curriculum.
And math also as well.
Absolutely.
You have an IV pump that will calculate for you, but as people have told me in sales rep group, the pump is only as good as the person putting the numbers in.
Right.
There's helpful there. You can go and they can say to you, someone's on such and such strip, and this is how I calculate. But it's only as good as the person putting the numbers in.
Right, so the quantitative literacy piece as
Yes,
well. So
absolutely.
again,
It's so
you'd be
important.
interested in data showing how
You
students.
do, everybody likes math.
Right, we can see connections across the curriculum.
Yes.
So maybe having something like that is continuous or holds continuity between all the different departments by using like those rubrics from the
AAC&U.
like, having some of the same, we're all looking for similar things from these 5 outcomes, right?
Yes.
And sharing those with across departments could help.
I think that's an incredible,
So, I mean,
great point.
And that's hopefully I guess where this heads towards, right? Useful information, right? So we're talking about a conversation across the institution to find out, right, what is it you hope your students will have, right? You hope they have not only computational literacy, but also, a sense of, what information literacy. So what information is valid or real,
Yes.
right? So a sales rep comes in and gives a whole presentation on this great new drug or whatever, like, how much value do I place on that? The ability to evaluate the quality of sources, information, and things like that are broad across all.
Yes.
But if that's not happening in your students don't have that, and your students don't have that, that's as an institution, we have to figure out what are we going to do to fix that. So that's, I think, where this goes, and that's what the question is what would be useful information to you to find out as we're formulating assessments in this realm. What would be useful for you to know? What data would you like to have displayed?
So I think for me personally, it would be very useful to know at what particular level my students are when they just take the very first accounting class versus, when they have taken several accounting classes. So I was thinking, in addition to the rubrics that Angela mentioned, maybe there are already some tools available that with some sort of surveys, that we could administer for our students that would, question them about those general
You
learning.
do need to remember.
Yeah, come on. I'm
getting there.
But yeah, I mean, that's a great point, right? Also, this idea of potentially some kind of framework, right, where it's a pre-test to maybe it's first semester coming in, and then maybe after 3 or 4 semesters, right? How is our curriculum preparing them, and where are they learning these things, and how are we doing in increasing their knowledge?
Hopefully that we will be able to.
It's a great point. It's a great point.
And that would be great for us, all of us, nursing, high school nursing, being selective enrollment, to have that information available to us. Because many times we get information and, you know, it's not accurate and all that. And how could we help a student be successful if we don't have that information for them? You know, our TEAS test and all of that give us an idea.
Right.
Everybody knows
Absolutely.
there's sometimes grades, we do what we gotta do.
Right.
And I won't even address that, you know. So we have this kind of student coming to us in selective enrollment, and gosh, where have you been? What has been going on? And you don't want this blame game, because we're all in it together. We all would still be here if we weren't in it together. So really having those kinds of tools to look and see where, you know, where do they need help? Where were they missing out? Because we're all different and unique.
Absolutely, and I think to Christopher's point too, right, it's not one course that's
No.
the responsibility, right?
No.
It's collectively together.
Yes.
So having these conversations across departments, across areas, and then really looking at the curriculum as a whole to how do we collectively improve and how do we collectively make sure that students have multiple opportunities to learn these skills before they leave. So great points. So I'm going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about some of the approaches, frame a little bit about general education outcomes assessment, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the potential approaches, and then kind of pitch our idea for where we're headed. So this idea with general education outcomes assessment, I wanted to have that prompt and kind of have a little bit of a conversation there, because really when we're setting up these structures, we want to begin with the end in mind, right? We don't want to put these structures and processes in place. We don't know where we're headed, and we don't know what data we want to collect. We don't know how it's going to be useful. So we want to not just do the assessment piece, right? But we really want to use the assessment results. So we want to know what results we're looking for, right, where we're headed, and kind of do a little bit of backwards design in that sense. So thinking about things like who are the likely users of the evidence that we want to gather, right? Is this our entire faculty body? Do we have information that the program chairs, right, or coordinators are going to use? Is this types of information something that could be really helpful for the curriculum committee, right, as they're looking through curriculum and developing, people who are developing new programs, right? Who are the end users of that evidence, and then how will they use it? And so I think some of the things that we've already talked about are really a really good direction of that, right? Faculty, what do we want to know about our students? What kind of structures and systems can we put in place to gather that evidence? And then how do we make sure that we are having the conversations and have the avenues in place to really use that data and make it meaningful for us and for our students. So I threw up an image of the assessment cycle here. We've used this in some of my presentations before, but I want to just kind of frame and talk a little bit about what this dialogue and what this process could look like before we get a little bit more specific into specific approaches. So for example, we want to assess our general education outcome around critical thinking, right? How are students learning to be critical thinkers in their courses here at Triton College? And how do we assess that? How do we know how students are learning that skill? So to start the assessment cycle here, right, the identifying desired outcomes, right, we have our general education outcome on critical thinking, and then we move towards assessing those outcomes, but this process is really driven by faculty questions about student learning, right? What do we want to know about what students are learning and how they're learning to be critical thinkers, and our questions about how to have the most effective teaching practices. So really we start with those questions about that, and that really drives the process for how we then assess the outcomes. And that process comes with support from the assessment committee, right? It's kind of being the steering committee for general education outcomes assessment. The assessment liaisons, which is a role that's going to be rolled out at the end of this semester. Professional development here in the CTE, right? How do we support faculty in asking those questions and creating designs? And then also the research office, right, in helping us really design effective assessments, interpret data, analyze data. And then as we move through, right, interpreting evidence with support, it's really going to be then about reporting those findings to the campus community. I think that's already been discussed a little bit, right? How do we effectively share that across the institution, among faculty in different departments, but also the wider campus community, right? How do we share that information with different audiences? Most especially, we're interested in how do we also share it with our students, right? Students should know what they should be learning as a result of being in our classrooms, and how do we share that data with students and involve them in this assessment process, but also with staff and administration here. And then also, how do we then start to move towards interpreting that evidence and then planning for improvements based on evidence? So that really comes within conversation, the faculty being in conversation with ourselves, discussing the results, determining the actions that we might want to take, the changes that we might want to make in order to improve student learning. So those could be things like additional resources, maybe curriculum changes, professional development. So really coming together in conversation, determining what changes we should make as a result of that data, and then implementing those changes. And so that's the kind of the overall how the assessment cycle works for general education outcomes assessment. Are there any questions on that piece? It's a really overarching kind of high level, but are there any questions about that?
And I just want to point out and highlight the most important thing, right, is that resources. I think in the past we've been doing assessment as a task, right? And I think the focus now needs to change to how do we leverage that into resources, whatever that resource looks like, to then improve, right? That's the goal. So I think there's always been this fear, perhaps, that the result will be bad. So let's not ask the difficult question, right? We started this whole conversation by saying, what is it we want to know? And I think we all know the answer, like implicitly, but don't want to know empirically. So we ask the question in a very couched way so that we get the answer we want. And I think that's the thinking that needs to be addressed now. And by highlighting that the goal here is improvement, and improvement happens by identifying what's wrong and what can we do to provide resources to rectify that.
Yeah. And I think also when we think about this assessment cycle on different levels, the identifying outcomes and the assessing, right? We've gotten, overall in higher education, really great at these, right? As we talk about assessment practices, but I think to Christopher's point, it's that like dreaded phrase, I don't know, I'm coming up with a new one, the closing the loop piece. I mean, it's just so, we got to get over it. It's like so overused, right? But that's that piece, right, where we do this one and we get stuck here at the identifying and assessing, right? But then it is really thinking about those new opportunities to have a dialogue, to share conversations, share data across department areas, and then really coming to a shared understanding of what needs to change in order to improve student learning. So here's overall a few approaches to this, right? So how do we actually tangibly do this on campus? So there's a couple different approaches. The first one is to identify embedded assessments of the general education courses. So that means, right, looking at our general education courses, looking at assignments that are already being done there, and using those to assess general education outcomes. In a way, we've done this previously, right? In a way, we've had courses that have linked to gen eds. We've done it within a particular course section, right? Like a faculty member will run an assessment in their course. They'll attach it to a gen ed outcome, right? And we'll say that, oh, we assessed critical thinking because I did an assessment in my course level, right? And so this gives faculty the greatest sense of ownership over the assessment because they're running their own assessment, right? They're doing it in their courses, so however many sections they may be teaching, so the greatest ownership. But it's really, really difficult to aggregate the results of this kind of assessment and to get an overall picture of how well students are doing across the curriculum. So this approach, I think, has been a reason why it's been difficult to have those interdepartmental conversations because it's individual faculties doing their own assessment, and it's really hard to talk across departments and areas in this way. So that is one way of doing that approach, but I think it has posed some challenges for us in the past. The second approach is using a common assignment within related disciplines. So faculty within related disciplines, for example, the sciences, can either use a common rubric or use specific rubric criteria to assess a common assignment or a common type of assignment, for example, lab exercises. And this does take coordination across departments, right? So it does take a level of communication and coordination across departments to engage in this type of assessment with multiple faculty members. The third approach is using a college-wide assessment. So this could be done in the form of a capstone, a portfolio, or a published test. Some of the advantages there are it's campus-wide, college-wide, but it can be seen as an add-on assessment, right? If it's not already occurring in the classroom, it can be seen as an add-on assessment. So there are some pros to these approaches, there are some challenges, and so there's not going to be a perfect way of doing it across the institution, but it's kind of choosing what we as faculty find the most valuable and what we believe is going to help us facilitate those conversations for improvement, right? Again, having the end in mind, what kind of data do we have to collect in order to inform our teaching and learning practices. Any questions on this piece? So the first approach that we wanted to talk to you about today is that approach where we kind of led this off, right, kicked this off with our conversations of the AAC&U value rubrics. And so the AAC&U value rubrics, they are shared rubrics, right, a common assessment tool for each of these general education outcomes. They articulate specific criteria for successive levels of performance. These rubrics do use authentic student work for assessment. It requires faculty collaboration and coordination within departments and across departments. But it can be challenging to aggregate some of these results, kind of depending on the process and how we set it up. It can be challenging, but again, nothing that we can't overcome, but that's just one of the challenges to is aggregating how different faculty in different disciplines, aggregating it to the institutional level. So for an example, right, I wanted to give you kind of a very tangible example of what this would look like as we roll out our general education outcomes assessment for critical thinking, right? So the process would look like the assessment committee as the steering committee would work with faculty to identify embedded assignments within the general education courses, okay? And so that is really going to be helped and aided by the mapping that we're doing this semester, where we are really linking our outcomes together from the course program and gen ed outcome levels. So we will be identifying assignments within general education courses. We'll be collecting artifacts of student learning from those courses that are asking students to think critically. And then all of those artifacts of student learning will be assessed, will be evaluated with the value rubric for critical thinking. Again, this is going to take some collaboration and coordination. The faculty who are doing the evaluation will need to kind of get together in a group, right? Norm the rubrics, make sure that they are assessing and evaluating student work using the same tool, but also with the same expectation. So it does take some coordination. But then you'll be evaluated using that value rubric. And that data will be shared publicly with our campus community. And then faculty can really into those assessment results to discuss them and then determine actions. Questions on this process?
So regardless of any discipline, that's nursing, nuclear, matter, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I'm thinking because we have accreditation a year from now,
Yeah.
we, regardless of what our accrediting body tells us we have to do for course outcomes and program outcomes, we still need to do something with the general education outcomes. Am I correct in my thinking?
This will be
no?
the general education courses. So like Rhetoric 101,
So not
Speech
for me.
101, not your program specific. It'll
Okay,
be the general education course. So as a result of a degree program, right, the writing courses, speech,
but for me, I do
humanities,
not have to,
your nursing courses
yes,
will be covered by your course level outcomes and your program level outcomes.
got it,
Yep, so this is the gen ed,
got it,
yes, gen ed courses.
gotcha.
But that is not to say that you
Oh, no,
do
we
not
always-
touch on
we-
general education,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yes, we have
Talk about-
communication, we have
Yes.
all of that,
And
yes,
ethical
yes,
considerations,
yes,
and information literacy, quantitative literacy, all of those things
yes,
occur somewhere here.
yes. If you look at our outcomes and what we talk about, they're all in there,
Right.
they're all there.
But this whole process, right, perhaps would be a little overkill to layer on top of, right?
Yes, yes,
So yeah, this is focused on those general education,
like Red 101, those kind of things, gotcha.
yep, that we know students are completing as a result of their degree.
But one of our, is talking about critical thinking, I mean, all that is in
And
there.
so, and that's then, right, Lauren wants to use a new term for it, so we won't, well, I'll just do the arm movement, those people listening, I'm doing a
Just
circle
make
with
the
my
circle.
arm, making
That
a
term
circle
works,
with my
that
arm.
works.
So that's then the goal, right? We identify our students maybe compared to what we would expect as a standard, are we're only hitting about 40% of critical thinking. Well, then campus-wide, we have this conversation, our students need a little more support in that area. So now when it comes up in your course, right? When an aspect of your teaching touches on critical thinking, you sort of phrase it and make sure that you're making it very clear, or you give it a little more emphasis, or you maybe tweak your assignment more so that the assignment is directing students to, we need to critically analyze these two things, we need to evaluate the two sides to come to
Yes.
a decision. So that's where this becomes
Yeah.
useful.
And that is where the discussing results and determining actions rests on all of us to improve student learning in those areas.
But we're not asking you to create a brand new assessment for your university.
Yes. Yeah, this is just the process, because there's no way we could assess every student on campus, right? So this is the selection process for assessing a sample of students to make informed decisions.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So I think at this point you have all seen the rubrics, but I just wanted to show you an example of the AAC&U value rubrics. Again, it would be an artifact of student learning, so it would be a student, some kind of assignment that they would turn in, right? Whether that is a speech, whether that's a paper, whether that's a case study, right? Some kind of assignment. And then faculty, again, would have to go through some kind of norming session to ensure that they are evaluating students in a consistent manner, but then using the same tool, we can assess student learning across different departments and areas. Okay. So the second approach that we want to talk to you about today is a tool that's called Heighten. And so in the approaches that I described earlier, this is a test, right? So this is a 45-minute computer-delivered module assessment, right? So this is a test that is given to students, for example, critical thinking. Some of the advantage of this is kind of what's going to build as kind of off the shelf, right? It's ready to implement, ready to use. So it is a standard, a nationally standard exam. And it really does ensure reliability and validity, right? So it is created in a way that it is reliable and valid across the scope of the institution. It's not subject to maybe the different faculty evaluations, right? There's no norming process needed. This is the test that is implemented and delivered, like a lot of the other standard tests that we rely on to assess student learning. And then also the ability by using a tool like Heighten, it allows us to compare our students' performance to national data and other two-year institutions. So we are able to, both two-year and four-year institutions, be able to compare our data to other institutions and how our students are learning as compared to other institutions. So the process, what this would look like, for example, for critical thinking, is we would identify, work with faculty to identify appropriate general education courses, and then choose a random sample of course sections to administer this test. And so it would be a 45-minute assessment tool that we would proctor in class, right? And then the results are immediately available as soon as the students finish that test. We have access to that data, and we can share that data. There's a student report that students can, again, involving them in this process, can see how they scored, for example, on their critical thinking. And then we would also have those results to share with our campus community. So there's not a grading or evaluation process. As soon as the students finish the exam, they receive the results, and we receive the results. So really quickly, I just wanted to pull up an example. I have the tool or the examples of results, so I just wanted to pull that up for you. So this is an example of the report that the students would receive. So you can see the criteria here in developing, proficient, and advanced. And this is the score that the students would receive here. And then this is the institution's view. So for individual students, and then also the for the reporting group, and then a comparison group. So again, being able to compare across institutions. And then you can see over on the right-hand side, we have these descriptions of students that are considered developing, proficient, and advanced. And so this would be kind of the center of the conversation around what skills do we need to work on for our students, and where can we be focusing those improvement efforts. So that would begin to kick off those conversations here, because we can see how our students are doing on each of those proficiency levels. Okay.
Does this program highlight like the soft skills that we're, like our department education is piloting some kind of module system like this, but it's focusing on soft skills. We're starting in fall, but I don't know the name of it. Is this the same one?
It's not the same.
Okay.
No.
It's the same company makes that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Software for soft skills? What is the one you're using?
I don't know the name of it. but
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's an ETS product as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but this would be, so like, for example, this test is a critical thinking test. They have several other exams, and they line up with our general education outcomes.
How much?
So we're gonna move into that, but our next approach that we're pitching is to pilot both of them to see what works best. For you're making me reveal my big ending. But they're doing a research study that they would, for this first critical thinking, we would get it for free.
So would this count as your class time? You know, you only have so many class time for exams and all that. So you
We're
would count
weighing,
this.
hold that thought. We're going to get to the discussion portion where we're going to weigh and get some feedback, and that is definitely one of those concerns, right?
I can wait. I mean, it seems like a very comprehensive tool and everything. Are you aware if all our competitors are using this tool already? Like the closest colleges to your colleges?
This is, I know for sure, I talked to someone at Wright, they are using this. I was just on a conference call where people were talking about using the AAC&U Rubrics and tools like, hey, there's a few other. It's definitely the product. If you go the assessment test route, this is it.
That's not actually my concern. My concern is, okay, let's say we go with this approach, right? And we administer it. How do we protect the data? Because I don't think we're at the stage where we would like to share our data, you know, nationally or with because we have just started working on this. You know what I'm saying? So we don't really know what the results are going to be, how bad they're going to be. We would like to have a chance before we can, you know, show the entire world these are our results for Triton College. We want to.
But I don't think the benchmarks identify.
It's not, it's just a comparison, it's the whole group of institutions. It's, you don't compare data by institution.
Because we want to have time to work on our assessment tools, we want to have time.
No, we will not become the lab.
It's it's a comparison group, so it's other institutions, and this is the report, so they compile that data. You can't compare institution by institution.
Now, what level is it at? You know, sometimes some of our students come in are barely out of high school level. So my concern would be that this critical thinking tool would be beyond some of
So
their scope.
that is part of the, where we talk about identifying appropriate sections to administer in. That would be part of that conversation, right? Of
Yes.
which courses, how do students typically progress through these courses? Which courses do we want to do a pre-test and a post-test? Pre, in maybe students where they're typically taking it upon entering Triton. Maybe we want to administer when we do it another cycle later in a course sequence. So those are all conversations that we can have in terms of which courses we choose, the timing, and that all comes down to the questions we have. What do we want to know about our students? Do we want to know the ones that are coming straight in, right, first semester freshmen? So do we want to know when they're leaving? Those are all parts of the research questions that we can ask, and we can choose when to administer that.
The other thing to keep in mind is that this is not an evaluation of our efficacy, right? This is supposed to give us a snapshot of where the students are at, right? And that's why on the right-hand side, you have developing proficiency and advanced, right? It is a 2-year institution, right? Is it reasonable to expect by completing 2 years there at Triton that you are now advanced in critical thinking? No, I don't think it is fairly reasonable that you are at least developing or becoming proficient, right? So I think you have to evaluate the results vis-a-vis what it is you do here. Now, the advantage of this is that it instantly gives you a snapshot of where they're at. And does it line up with what you would expect, or is it way off from where you would expect? And that's, I think, what we're trying to do in the most efficacious way to get us sort of somewhere to start, a starting point. So I don't want people to feel like you're being tested and then evaluated on the core performance of the students.
And as long as the powers that be administration will understand that this is where this exam, is being taken. Yeah, I mean, to be blunt, you know how that goes. Someone may say to you, well, here you are at the middle of your course and here's your students, why aren't they here? So you would want to think that no matter what was offered in the curriculum, that would be a good spirit.
And I
with the
hope,
awareness that they're where they are.
And I hope that through these processes, the central focus is that it's faculty. We decide the research questions.
Yes.
We are deciding the tools, right? And then we are in conversation of how we either ask for additional resources or how we look at our curriculum or how we ask to be educated through professional development to improve student learning, right? So again, this is part of the assessment committee being part of the faculty senate, right? This is faculty work and that we are driving the whole cycle, right? And so we are taking that data, we are deciding how we are using it to improve student learning, right? The whole piece of this, right? We don't want to attach assessment apart from student learning, right? That's what it's about. Assessment is not evaluation of teaching, right? It's assessment of student learning. So that I just wanted to give you a glimpse into what those reports, again, these are general, but what these reports look like. And then just to show you this as the institution's overall score, and then the sub-scores between analytic and synthetic. So this is just an example of what the report would look like when we get it back. So, again, I previewed this a little bit, right? But what we are hoping for, right, and we definitely want to hear feedback, but this is kind of the direction that the assessment committee has talked about, is to try out both, right? Pilot both and what is going to result in the most useful data and prompt the most valuable conversations for us. So in fall of 2019, as we roll out these assessment processes, we're looking to implement Huntington, right? So have a sample of students who are administer the test and to get that snapshot. Also, at that same time, we can work after this mapping is done this semester, we can work with faculty to collect artifacts of student learning. And then in the spring semester, we can really share that data from implementing Heighten with the campus community during our Learning Improvement Week. And then we can also score the artifacts of student learning using the AAC&U value rubrics, go through the process, right, and see how it goes, right? Let's go through that norming process. Let's evaluate those artifacts using the value rubrics, and then begin to have a conversation at that point of what is the process that is going to work for us as an institution, what is answering our research questions, which method of assessment is really answering those questions, and what is prompting the most meaningful and valuable conversations on student learning. What are your thoughts?
How much?
So this first one, this pilot would be free. So we can try it
How much
out.
would that be?
It's per test,
Yeah.
so it is flexible in that sense where we can choose our sample size. So we can say we want to give it to 20 students, right, and see where they're at. We can say we want to do 500 students and see where it's at. So it is per test. It's like $8 or $10 per test. So
Yeah.
And it's doable.
it's doable.
It's
Yeah.
doable for them.
And again, this first kind of trial, we can participate in the research study, and they will give us the test for free, I think 300 to 500.
Now, do you have to use course time or can you use a testing center for this?
So that's another conversation, right? In other institutions, I've heard both. In class, students are there, they're in the seats, they try. If it's not, you can have difficulty having students show up for it, right? You choose the students. How do you incentivize them to come, to try, right? To take a 45-minute test that's outside of class time. So there are pros and cons to each, right? Giving up a class session in that sample size, and we decide how many students, we decide the courses and the sections collectively, and we determine that the information that we're going to gather is important enough to do this, right, once a year. Or we can think of different avenues as well. Institutions do it differently. There are challenges and benefits to both.
The plus side is, like, because it's a random selection of classes and because it's, the general education outcome will change every year. It's not the same courses that are gonna have to give up a class period every year. It'll be like different courses. It's just, this is the year, like, you're participating in the general education assessment. So a little easier than telling people every year you're gonna have to give up a class.
Right.
That's a big help.
And then
So
the
it's
day,
not
then
all
it's
the time.
truly random, right? Instead
It is
of
truly
the
random.
students who show up to go to the testing center, right? You're gonna get skewed just by the students who are or are not showing up to take the test.
And when you think about, we already do this already with SESI and SESI, right? You randomly are selected, we get emails saying that this would be administered in your course, and we make that happen because we value the data that comes out of that, right? And I mean, I've been here for 12 years, it's like, I've only had 2 classes I think are attended SESI or SESI. Over the big picture,
Yes.
it's not really matters.
Right.
But if you're, yeah,
Absolutely.
if it were every single semester, we're gonna be losing one class period, yes, that would be onerous, and we would never have.
But yes, it would be once a year. So whether we choose fall, spring, would be one thing.
And going back to my comment, I wasn't concerned with the data protection within our institution, you know, but maybe not necessarily, since we are going to be in the trial period, so maybe working out into the contract that they don't show our data just yet to other institutions, that's what I.
Well, you mean with identifying information. So sharing the data, but not having just this is Triton College, and I don't think that's part of their practice. I think it's comparison data. No, I don't have like a language in the contract I can point to, but I have not seen in any of the information I've looked at specific institutional data, but we can definitely look into that and say, you know, using our data but with no identifying information, right?
At least I'm holding it.
Well, I mean, it's gonna be shared with HLC and, you know, amongst our community members, they're going to know. There's no way to hide all the outcomes from the assessments. That's the whole point of doing an assessment.
No,
is
yeah, I
to share
know,
the information.
but we don't even have like.
But they're not gonna compare us to Northwestern, you know?
That's what I'm worried, like,
Well, but the other sense is like we kind of want to, right? Because we want to know, right? I think it's whether or not the data is not good or bad, right? I think we've said this before in
It's
our
a
training.
baseline and have
It's
we
a
moved it?
number, right? And so for us, we know we have first and second year students. We see the number. Are we okay that it's lower than third and fourth year students?
And
Yeah,
it's moving,
right?
most importantly,
That's,
moving.
so
Absolutely.
I think it would be very helpful if we administered that, if it comes to that.
Mhm.
Like, right when they enter Triton College and when they get ready
I
to
think
graduate.
that's great.
That would be the most meaningful day.
Yeah, so we can think about that as we do the assessment cycle. There's other institutions, and this is something we can have a conversation on, who do year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. Just talking to an administrator at Joliet Junior College, where they're doing 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, and then I think they have 5, 6, 5, 6. So granted, year 1, you don't get to your general education 5 or 6 for a few years, but you get that immediate turnaround. So there are multiple ways of doing this, and institutions are figuring out what works best for them and for their assessment processes. So these are all, again, as faculty, these are the conversations we have, and as having representation on the assessment committee, and as we take things to Senate, these are the decisions that are being made, right? So being part of those conversations is important.
And to Julian's point, right, the end desired result is to demonstrate that you've made movement, you've made progress. If we're only relying on the AAC&U rubrics, right, it will take 2 cycles for us to get to there, right? So with the Titan, we get instantaneous result. We already know our baseline now. We can much sooner identify where has the improvement occurred, right? As opposed to with the AAC&U, it extends the timeline, which unfortunately we don't have the time. So that's part of the other benefit to this approach.
Other piece, just to clarify, the Higher Learning Commission genuinely doesn't care what the results of our assessment are. But what they want to see is that we're doing the assessment, we're getting results, that we're evaluating them and conversing about them, and we're making changes. They even know that we might try some changes that we think are gonna make improvements, and it doesn't. And they're fine with that, as long as then we take a look at that, we talk about that, and we're like, okay, let's change and make another approach instead. They just want to see that that evaluative process is happening, and that we are truly making changes, and that as an institution, we're putting our money where our mouth is, right? So that's where the resources piece comes in too. That's going to be a critical piece that the institutional leadership is going to have to deliver on, in terms of when we're getting stuff coming forward related to our assessment of student learning, we're going to have to put resources behind it. So that's a big thing. Like, this is faculty-led, process. Then that's great, because it's a great way for faculty to really be supporting the resource access, right?
Great conversation. We're a smaller group, but we are mighty.
So can I ask,
Yeah,
just
Julia.
a summary for what you did today?
Please.
So concerning our individual roles as faculty or departmental roles, we're not involved too much with this gen ed assessment. We link our courses and our programs to the gen eds, but actually physically doing the assessment, it doesn't sound like I'm going to be doing too much. Maybe presenting you with these artifacts, helping build the rubrics for value rubrics on those. But there may be faculty that aren't involved at all. It seems like it's going to be a small group doing the gen ed assessment, but then maybe we have to be more active in the program assessment and course level assessments. What do you? Am I making sense here?
No, I think that's a pretty fair, right? I think when it comes to evaluating them, we'll probably be looking for teams of faculty to do that. The committee's still pretty small, so I feel like when we do that,
If we go that route, that if the height, there's not too many people involved in that whatsoever. So I came in here thinking I need personally to assess if my program and my courses are meeting the gen ed outcomes. But I may not be doing that. I still have to go back and think, here are the 5 gen ed outcomes. What is my role in teaching some of those?
Yeah, so I think that having, oh, do you want to?
So, no, I just want to say, to you that there's also then, right, like, degree programs have a gen ed core,
Right.
but certificate programs don't, right?
Say it again?
Certificate programs don't. And this semester, we will be mapping where in our program coursework, we do actually have a touch on the gen ed requirement. So I wouldn't want to say, oh, no, you don't teach English, so never mind, none of this
No.
applies to you.
Right.
There should be an element of that in what you do, because not every single student is going to go through the gen ed core. I'm thinking like with the EMT people, right? Like
So
they
we can
take
still,
2
you know,
courses and they're
we
gone,
would still
right?
produce these artifacts, assignments that show critical thinking
Yeah.
or quantitative literacy, and we could assess those.
And that's
But maybe not all the departments do that.
And that's, then hopefully what the data are gonna show, that's part of what we're trying to get that baseline, that benchmark, and say, hey, you know what, as a campus, not you as a teacher, not you as a department, but as a campus, our students are scoring kind of on the low side in this area. Is there something when you're teaching your course that you could sort of give it a little more like elbow?
Build
Like a
that
little-
into this plan.
Yeah, lean on it, be like, hey, have you all thought about this, like, presenting this now, but let's start looking at it not as just a lecture, but actually a conversation about critical thinking, or, how did I'm giving you this example on the smart board, right? How did I choose this out of all the 10,000 options on Google? Like, what was my thought process of selecting this, right? Like, so there's a way in which you can embed that in everyone's course, but we ultimately just have to have that baseline to begin with, right? But
And when it comes, like, for example, right, for course outcomes and program level outcomes, we are expecting you to be regularly engaging on that, like you said, right? But for gen ed, there's just not a way, right, feasibly, that we can assess every student, right, with every gen ed outcome. And so that's where, as we're doing a sample, not every faculty member may be directly involved in the assessment process, but to Christopher's point, everyone should be. The hope is, right, adjunct full-time faculty are participating in the conversation about the data, how we can make changes, and then taking that back to your curriculum to make improvements to student learning. But I think in terms of the actual, like, implementation administrative piece, right, that's not necessarily the expectation that every faculty member or chair will be involved in, like, directly assessing them.
And so with department, in our own departments, again, we're doing the course assessment and the program assessment. We should be doing both each year. And then we'll be part of the gen ed assessment
Correct.
in either the assessment piece or the outcome piece.
Exactly. And the improvements, right, the discussion improvements, we're hoping those are incredibly robust conversations. Back to Pamela's point about resource allocation, right? We need the faculty body to be engaged in those conversations. Absolutely. And in terms of course and program, that is what the end of this semester, moving into the summer, is really going to be focusing on. Is, we're going to have our documentation done by the end of spring semester, right? Our assessment handbook of what are our new processes, right? How are we rolling this out? And then as we move towards the summer into the fall of implementing, we're really going to be having conversations about how do we design those with these expectations to work for you, to answer your questions, and to improve student learning. So that how the course and the program fit together, that's going to be our conversations moving forward. So lots of support around that. So it's hopefully not as much work as maybe it comes across at first glance.
Okay, thank you.
I want to be cognizant of time, so thank you so much. Any lingering questions, burning questions before we go? Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. We look forward to more conversations soon. Have a good one.
Are you gonna put this online?
Yes,
Perfect.
being recorded as we speak. Should have warned everyone about that beforehand, right?
Okay, did anyone